Um, a simple question for you to start this conversation is, how are young people involved in the political processes across the continent, and what are the impact? What impact does this involvement mean?
Thank you, Patrick. So I think that young people are very involved in the voting processes, where still, when we look at ourselves globally, we still have a larger turnout when we look at young people when it comes to elections compared to other European countries or Western countries where that's actually on the decline. Africa is still pretty high. So that means that as much as young people feel a sense of hopelessness because of the economy and many other factors, they still feel this inkling to participate. They still have a sense of hope. Even though if we can debate, this is very debatable. When we look at our systems, a lot of them will argue that our systems are not fair and free or credible, but they will still find the energy to wake up and participate. But where I see a lot of a big change is young people looking at campaigning as entrepreneurship. In our last election, we had plenty of students drop out of school to join campaign teams. I'm talking about joining social media campaign teams because we're beginning to see a shift where politicians want to use these platforms to be able to share what their vision is, perhaps, or their manifestos, but they don't really understand how to use these communication platforms. But the people who do are millennials or young people. So they find themselves dropping out of school because they find it more lucrative to make money during that particular period, as short as it may be. And they find it more beneficial than to stick in school. So we had a lot of school dropouts during that period. And where I also see them participating is attending these rallies, yes. Many of them being used, yes. But when you look at it keenly, as recently as maybe 3 weeks ago here in Kenya, when Raila Odinga was going to Bama Market and the deputy president went as well, and there was violence where people were throwing stones, you will find that sometimes it can be the same group of people who are being used to instigate this violence. There's no particular loyalty to a particular individual because they are being hired as goons for that particular moment. And this is very common in a lot of urban settings and urban areas where youth do view this as a way of them getting some resources during a period where things are extremely difficult. And this is the easiest way for them to be engaged. Because, again, at the same time, this is when politicians are reachable. They come to the people, they come to the grassroots, and you can see them face to face. So they might as well utilize you then. And as much as it's very short term and short lived, for them, at least they feel that they are gaining something from it, as small as it may be, compared to waiting another 5, 4 years of this dry spell of not seeing this individual at all. And I don't necessarily believe that, I'm speaking mainly for Kenya, that there's a youth block. I don't, because what ends up happening is a study that we did at Siasa Place in 2015, where we followed about 47 youth into the run up to 2017, and just basically asked, when does the hate speech or tribalism, or when does it start? When do those conversations start? And you begin to see that they even begin to disassociate friends who you would normally have conversations with. Now, because they belong to a particular tribe, you're not talking to them. I think also has a big impact when we talk about the social media or internet reach. As much as we talk about how, oh, in Africa, a large number of people don't have smartphones or access to mobile phones, yes, we still depend on radio. But I think we are not considering the fact that the internet penetration is continuing to increase. We are not considering the fact that young people today don't necessarily follow mainstream media. They don't go to watch the news at 7 like our parents did, or run home at 9 because I've got to catch the news for that day. They can just basically get it off of their phones. And this is the thing. They don't need to get it from a mainstream company. They can get it from a blogger who might not even be certified, a blogger who's not a journalist, a blogger who could be sharing fake news. And so how do you get this population? Because they feel that they're in the conversation, but it might not necessarily be fact. It might not be fact checked. They're in the conversations, but they're in spaces that they feel safe, which generally can be toxic at the same time as much as they provide freedoms.
Mm,
So I think when we talk about youth engagement in political processes, they're still way about in the sidelines. They're
mm,
not participating as they should be, which for me, politically, I view it past voting day. It's being able to interact with the leadership that has been elected after an election, being able to be in touch with your member of parliament or member of county assembly, whatever representative that may be. And a lot of times these individuals are very difficult to reach. So when you're pushing for avenues to make them more reachable, one example, social media, they come full force against you. They don't view social media as real, but
yeah.
we're beginning to see a hybrid because
Mm,
WhatsApp groups, we're seeing members of parliament joining WhatsApp groups where their constituents are discussing issues, but they can discuss those issues there and take them as real, but then they don't consider feedback from there as real, which doesn't make sense to me. And I think those are other avenues where youth can participate, but they are not considered as genuine participation or genuine feedback when they use those platforms.
yeah. So, do you see this change in the demographics making youth a political force of its own, or or the youth culture itself becoming a political force, or there's no change actually going on?
I think there will be a change just because the challenges, I believe, are more. I've been in debates where you can have conversations with people who grew up in the 70s, whatever, and they'll always tell you, oh, you don't understand, things were difficult under a dictator, you do not understand. And I feel that the challenges are different because, one, take this for example, we're dealing with a pandemic. This is a global issue, something that our parents have never had to deal with or understand, and these are things that I think are going to be challenges. And the reason why I feel that it's going to be a drastic change is if we even think about land, when we're talking about space, to our parents, owning land was the thing. If you didn't make it in life
Mm,
until you owned a piece of land to be able to build a house. But now, if you talk to someone my age or younger, owning land is a dream. That's something that, because of how many we are, or because of how expensive it is, a lot of people are not going to be able to own land. So that conversation has completely shifted. And even when we talk about housing, again, owning your own house was seen as you've established yourself. But a lot of young people today are renting. To think to own a house is almost impossible. And we're not even talking about a house. We're talking about young people living in rooms, living in units, living more than one family just because they need to survive. So the economy is going to have a greater impact, I believe, because when we talk about a larger population, I think the conversations that a lot of states and governments are going to be talking about is distribution of revenue, distribution of wealth. And if young people don't feel that dime or that shilling, whatever, get into their pockets, then we're going to have conversations of having a population that's unstable. We're going to start talking about violence. We're going to start talking about immigration, and I think that's the aspects that we need to be concerned about. Is as much as the population is increasing, are we also increasing avenues where this population have access
yeah.
to economic empowerment? They have to go hand in hand. So if we're busy focusing on the population increasing and not focusing on the economy, then we're going to have a break. Something's going to have to give. And that's where I see the trouble arising. And so because of that break, then we're going to see this majority population being frustrated. And with frustration, then it's easier to manipulate, and then it equals violence.
Well, I can't leave this discussion without at least asking you this. Right beside your country, Kenya, the one of the leading political opponents used to be a former musician, and we had the same scenario in Madagascar, where we had a DJ taking over the
Yeah,
country.
I remember
And,
that.
and this obviously creates a shock to the system for a number of people. But these are new forms of expression that are giving life to aspirations, which may not necessarily be through, may not come out as the individual who's running, but show some of the aspirations that young people might have. And are they having those spaces? And what do these dynamics mean in terms of our political processes, in terms of our peace processes?
Mhm. That's a very interesting question because I think that for this particular generation, and there's a younger one coming with Gen Z, which I totally don't understand. The TikTok generation, I don't get it. But I think every generation just doesn't understand the next. But I can say for millennials, what's extremely important to them is the link to community. As long as the individual understands the needs of community, then you're viewed as a leader. I view millennials slightly different than boomers or previous generations due to the fact that it's not necessarily about selfish gain entirely. And that's why we've been able to see several campaigns over the last 1 year. When we talk about Black Lives Matter, I mean, it's about community, about having equality. And even when we talk about climate change, how there have been so many particular protests and demonstrations about caring for the planet. That's something, again, that was not seen in a previous generation. Maybe it happened in the 60s, but not as intense as it is now, because the 60s is debatable because there were also other drugs involved. But even when we talk about leadership, I think that's where we see a different kind of leadership where, the general question, the philosophical question of, is a leader to be loved or hated? And a lot of times that's where the question on benevolent dictators comes in, where some people are in the mind frame that Africa needs benevolent dictators. And I think that we're growing a crop of young people where not necessarily so. Is it really important to be feared? Do we have to have a dictator in order to see progress? And people are questioning that. And this is something that parents didn't do. They didn't question. And so it's also seen as disrespectful because millennials are over here wondering, do we have to go in that particular direction? And our parents are looking at us like, how dare you ask such a thing? Of course, we're going in that direction. Why would you question it? And so I think there is a clash. There is a clash in terms of the kind of leadership that our countries need, but also the kind of challenges these leaders are going to face. We're going to have to find different people. And I think people are just searching for a change because we've been going through particular leadership in this direction. We've been selecting the same kind of people and we haven't been seeing much change. So people just want something fresh, something different. And that's how you're seeing these kind of individuals being selected, from DJs to musicians, because they have the influence and they influence the youth. And to the youth, as long as you make me feel good, then I trust in your capabilities and I'm going to be able to elect you. That's all I need to hear. I don't have to see that you have degrees in this particular thing. You don't have to be so serious with life. I think social media has made us open up a little bit more in spaces that we would never really see. When people, I normally joke about this, like for me as a woman who's engaged in politics and governance, it's very difficult for me to use my Twitter handle and talk about, say, fashion. Like, oh my goodness, I love this dress and I'm gonna wear this dress today. Do you know where I got it? People will literally ask me what happened. Are you okay? What happened to your account? But it's very easy for a male politician to talk about football and the game that he watched and who he supported, and he feels so good about it. And having a good time at a bar with his friends, that's normal. And I think that change, where we now see political leaders as friends on our level as human has made us push the envelope and push the bar as to who can represent us. We want more people who look like me. And unfortunately, that's more for men. For women, we're still battling with the box, where if you're a woman in politics, you stick there. If you're a woman in fashion, you stick there. So I would say that's why I think that young people just want someone they can relate with, and they feel that if I can relate with this person, then they understand my problems, then they're the best person to represent me.
Yeah. Great. So, but you talked about the 60s and you talked about social media. And I guess my last question to you is in relation to youth and what they've been able to do with digital strategies,
Mhm.
how they've used information as the new power game within democracy across the continent. Because we see that a lot of political elites or people or organizations that have been in power for a long time are suddenly finding that they have to regulate social media. They have to
Mm.
engage or find a way of controlling it. And you can see as elections come closer that they're, quietly terrified of it. So, from your perspective, how have you used the digital platforms or digitalization as a new force within the political processes?
Definitely through sharing information. And I feel for our region, it's not even about control. During an election, they completely shut it down. They don't even
Well,
want
it
to
happened in
try.
my region too.
Yeah, they shut it down. They don't want, young people conversating about anything. They want it completely quiet. And I think that's extremely, it's scary because that's a form of gagging. And I think that young people have been able to get closer together, because even when we look at Nigeria with the NSARS campaign, people were able to fit into the conversation because all of our countries deal with police brutality. There was a sense of commonality, and we were able to support that campaign and look at what it was able to do in a matter of days to weeks in a country where bureaucracy exists, that things, when we talk about change, it's very slow change. So I think that's one aspect. And even something that we've been involved in was in Mozambique, where, speaking of Nigeria, where they speak English like us, Anglophone. But when you talk about other countries that don't speak the same language, but you're still able to connect. Because in Mozambique, after the election, about 30 youth to 15 youth were actually jailed. They were election observers. They were young. And because they belonged to a particular political party, they were jailed for 30 days. And we were able to hear about that and join that campaign, even though we had people who had to translate to us what exactly was happening. There was a sense of connection because we're saying these are youth who are participating, something that we fight for here in Kenya. So I think that what social media has done, it has been able to level the field where youth can be concerned about one another in their different corners and support. And I believe that it started a while back. I think the biggest one that I saw in the beginning days would be Fees Must Fall with South Africa. And these are issues that, youth can connect with and actually see that we have the same challenges. And that is bringing the reality of a united Africa more quickly than what our leaders do to meet every other day with the AU and things like that, and trying to figure out how to bring this continent together. I think social media is already doing it. And if they just hop on board and support some of these campaigns, then we can begin to see the barriers between our countries beginning to break. Because even in that process, we're learning about these countries. We're learning about their challenges and their leadership as well.
Okay, well, thank you very much, Nerima. Yeah, as you can see, COVID has also allowed us or forced us to at least have these conversations in a remote way using digital platforms. So thank you very much
Exactly.
for your interventions, and let's hear what others would have to say about the same topic.